Greetings and salutations. Here today to talk about movement tools and setting up reference sketches in Fusion 360. I was chatting to Dutch Goalie and Renaissance Tinkerdork in 3D Printing Nerds Discord channel the other day, and they asked about doing those sort of things, so here to explain aspects about those, and let's get to it. Alright, so the first thing we'll go over is the setting up of attached canvases. So if you wanted to put some reference images in for what you're modeling, this will show you how to do it, and this is actually sort of preparation for the next video in the series. But basically you just go up to Insert and then select Attached Canvas, and then you have to pick a plane. Now I just happen to have top, front and side views of an object that I'm going to create in my next video, so we'll start with the front. I'll select the front plane, then you click the little button to select your image and select front, and that will place that in the scene. Now you can obviously change the opacity of it. I generally tend to leave it on 50 myself, just for the sake of being able to see through it if you need to. You can also check that box to make it selectable. Generally I tend to leave that off because otherwise it can get in the way when you're trying to do things, and occasionally, such as in this case, if we look at the front, you can see it's mirrored or backwards, so we want to do a horizontal flip, and that just makes sure that it's set the correct way. Now you can type in the details for the scale, etc. if you want, but for now I'm just going to go OK, because we'll actually scale it accurately in our next step. And this is made all the more easy by the fact that we actually have dimensions on this drawing. If you go over to your canvas and expand that, and then right click on the canvas and say Calibrate, what this allows you to do is select 2 points on the drawing and define dimensions for it, and what it'll do is it'll scale that drawing up so that it meets those dimensions. And given that we've got dimensions here about 171.2 between there and there, and they're good reference points for me to use because they're on the center line, and that'll give us a good overall size. Just click once down there and then once there, and then type 171.2, and as you can see, it blew it up really big. And what we can then do is, because you can see the center line through the actual reference drawing isn't through the blue center line of the actual grid itself, to make things a little bit easier later on, if we go to Edit Canvas, we can actually align that to the center line, and you can either do that by moving the handle, but as you can see, it doesn't quite line up exactly where you might want it to. So yeah, if you zoom in, it actually allows you to make smaller movement adjustments. Make sure we know which one's the actual center line, and drag it across so that the center line is pretty much in the middle of that dotted line there. Maybe a little bit that way. That looks pretty good. So just click OK on that one. And we'll go back to our 3D view. Then you basically just repeat the steps. So you go attach to canvas, and this time we'll do side view. Select our side view and hit OK. We'll just rotate it so we know what we're looking at here. Just go right. And that is the right way for what we want. So I'll do the scaling first, because I'll probably throw it off the center line if I scale it anyway. So one, go there, calibrate, and this is probably the easiest reference point. So click once there, type 38, that scales it up. And right click, edit canvas, and try and line that up in the middle of that red line, which is the center line of not only the grid but the other canvas that we placed in the front view. That looks pretty close. And we'll just rotate it a bit, because you'll probably find that these two images are not perfectly aligned. It will depend on the images that you use. Like if you've gone to the trouble to actually make sure that they're aligned pixel wise, they should be okay when you bring them in, but for these particular ones, I just grabbed them off the net, and as such they're not quite as perfect as you might want them to be, but it's easy enough to make the adjustment. So we got 10, move it up there, it's a little bit too high, goes to 11, so we'll try about 10.5. Oops, where did that go? Oh, 10.5 meters. Let's chuck another M in there. There we go. Yeah, that looks near enough for what we want. So we'll just hit enter on that. And there you've got your front and side view, which you can then use as a reference for your sketches. Obviously, having sketches that are already schematic diagrams makes things a lot easier, but quite often you don't have that kind of thing. You might just happen to have a front and side view of an object, which is what I generally tend to work with, and they work equally as well. Just, yeah, if you happen to have diagrams this accurate, all the better. But yeah, exactly the same process to do the top plane. I'm not going to go into that because obviously you've seen me do it twice, but yeah, that's pretty much how you do attached canvases to use as a reference. So now the next thing I was asked was about the movement tools within Fusion, and it is true they can be a little bit tricky to understand because they kind of work differently depending on where you are. So if I was to say, we'll just create a sketch here, do it on the front plane. We'll just make a rectangle, stop sketch, and we'll extrude that a little bit. Oh. Get rid of that too. So now we're in our main component and we've got our body. So if you have the body selected and you right click and choose move copy, you'll get a movement tool show up, and you can move it via the panel here, or you can make adjustments via the handle itself. When you make that movement on the body directly, it will only affect that body. If you select the component which can contain multiple bodies, you can actually move all of the bodies at once using those movement controls. But you have to be a little bit careful when you do it, because that can actually change the origin point of that component, and I'll demonstrate that a little bit later. But as you can see with this little movement gizmo, you've got this white square, you've got an up, sideways, and the little ring around the side. So what this white box here does is it basically allows us to just freely move in the up and sideways direction, whereas if you use these handles, it obviously limits them to one direction or the other. And same for the rotation, so you can rotate around that point, or if we turn it around to the side, you can see it changes so that we rotate that way, and this also changes so that we can only move up and sideways along that plane. And that is pretty universal throughout all of the movement tools, in terms of what the handles of the gizmo itself can do. Now the other way that you can move is via these controls here, so you can limit the kind of movement to rotation, and when you select rotation, it'll ask you for an axis around which to rotate. So if we select that edge, for instance, it'll basically revolve around that edge. You can use edges, you can use sketch lines from memory, you can use the axes of the origin. It really just depends on where you want to move, how you want to move it. So then if we go translate, as you can see, we get our little gizmo handles again, but all of the free movement and rotation are missing. So that's basically just up, sideways, and forwards movement. And then you've got point to point, which allows you to select an origin point. So if we just go to our front view, make this a bit easier, we can select, say, that point on the model, and you probably have to have another point. I often use like origin or sketch points or such to do this, but if we click on that point down there, you can see that it basically moved that top right point to where the bottom right point was. If we right click on the body, we can go create component from bodies. So that basically created a new component with the bodies. So now if I go and create a second body, a new sketch just in the front, this time we'll do a circle, just do one over here, I'll do a stop sketch, select that and I'll just extrude it that way. Set on new body. Okay, so as you can see, that actually created it under the first component, because this little black dot up here indicates that that is the active component. So that's one thing you have to be careful with when working with components, is making sure that you've got the correct components selected. Otherwise it'll get created in the wrong spot. So what we can actually do is drag and drop that into that component and set it as the active component. So now we've got both bodies grouped under the one component. Now if we show the origin, you can see that it's centered in world space at the moment. So if I use the circle, select the second component, say, and just click M on the keyboard to bring up our movement tools, and we've got move object bodies. We can move that about within the component and everything's fine. But if we right click on the component itself and say move, it's selected all of our objects, and then we go move. But what you can see here is it's actually selected the origin as well, and by default the visibility of the origin is actually off, so a lot of people tend to not notice that that origin actually gets selected. So they'll go in, move their components and hit OK, and then when they go back to edit something later, they'll find that if we unhide that one, there's actually two origins, and that can cause problems depending on what you're doing. It's kind of hard to explain until you actually find yourself in a situation where it does cause a problem, but that is definitely something to be aware of, that it can actually move the origin. All right, so another thing with the movement tool is, if we, you can see that there's a little gizmo handle here, and we select that point. There's also this set pivot, and if you click that, what that actually allows you to do is change that point. So if you wanted to, say, make the pivot at this end, you could shift it there, or you can attach it to that face, for instance. Completely depends on your needs, but there will be times when you might go to move something, and due to the actual shape of the object, you might find that it puts the pivot on the side of the object or at a weird angle or something. That's where this set pivot option comes in very handy, because it allows you to basically set it where it needs to be, and generally, like as you can see, the movement handle for that is not horizontal. So if you wanted to move that object horizontally and it was set like that, you can select set pivot, and when you hover over that center circle, you can see it's horizontal. So you click on there, and moving the handle doesn't actually move the object until you either click the little check mark next to the measurement or uncheck the box there. Then you can move the object. So yeah, that's another very, very handy thing, because especially with odd shaped objects, like I was modeling a heart a while ago, and I wanted to move it from the center line, but when I selected move, it would always put the origin on the top left curve of the heart, but because I was trying to make fine adjustments to line the center up with something, when I was zoomed in far enough to make that happen, the handle was off the screen. So that allows you to re-center the movement handle to where you need it to be to make it more useful. Okay, so the only other kind of thing about movement tools, and it's not strictly a movement tool per se, but if you're working with forms in particular, so we've basically got a rectangular form here. If we go to edit form and switch to the front view, you'll see that this gizmo has these little extra lines here which aren't there at other times. Move it there to make it a bit more visible. And what they are is scaling tools. So if you grab hold of that line, you can stretch, and if you grab hold of the vertical line, it will stretch it horizontally. Obviously, because this line is just one line, it won't scale. But if we selected another line, you can see that it stretches it out. And if you grab the little corner one, which you can't really see because the hand is too big, it'll actually scale it in both directions, up and sideways. So that's kind of like your uniform scale, as it were. So you've got vertical non-uniform, horizontal non-uniform, and in the corner uniform scale. And that's pretty much all there is to movement tools that I can think of. If you have a particular question about anything, feel free to leave a comment, and I'll be more than happy to help you out, or even pop up another quick vid. Alright, well that pretty much wraps it up for this video. You can check out my next few videos coming up, where I'll be going over creation of a piston, basically be doing the modeling and the assembly in Fusion. It'll probably be broken up into a series of 2 or 3 videos, and again, these were requests by people in 3D Printing Nerds Discord channel, and yeah, it should be quite an interesting one. We'll be going over quite a few things, so if you've got any questions or anything, particular that you'd like to see in one of those videos, drop a comment below and I'll see what I can do. Alright, thanks for watching. Catch you next time.